Let's jump right in. Welcome to this explainer. We're going to take a hard look at the modern exhaustion epidemic. Because honestly, you might think you're tired from a lack of sleep, or maybe you just think you're working too hard. But the science is pointing to something entirely different. What we're actually facing is a biological crisis, and it's being caused by this massive, artificial labyrinth of completely irrelevant choices.
35,000. Think about that for a second. That is the staggering number of decisions you make every single day. And here's the crazy part. Your brain is literally bleeding energy because we've all become addicted to the comfort of meaningless choices. Most of these are utterly trivial, right? What to wear, what to eat, which meaningless email to reply to first. We like to think this represents freedom, but the data is telling us a completely different story. It's a biological trap.
See, your prefrontal cortex, that executive command center sitting right there behind your forehead, it doesn't actually distinguish between choosing a life-altering investment and, say, spending 45 minutes scrolling to pick a Netflix show. It just doesn't. It processes all of them using the exact same metabolic hardware. It's burning up glucose and oxygen to synthesize ATP for cellular energy, completely regardless of how important the choice actually is. So when you drown yourself in these micro-decisions, you're not exercising autonomy. You're just accelerating neurobiological exhaustion. And by the time you need to make a decision that actually dictates your future, your cognitive tank is completely empty, and you just default to the path of least resistance. You end up trading your potential for the immediate gratification of a screen. Stop pretending you're tired from hard work. You're just exhausted from navigating all these irrelevant choices.
Section 1. The biological cost.
Comfort isn't just making us weak, it's leaving an actual toxic residue in your prefrontal cortex. To put it in perspective, your brain accounts for a tiny 2% of your body mass, but it absolutely devours 20% of your body's total energy budget. It is the most metabolically expensive piece of real estate you own. So when you force your brain to constantly evaluate all these options, it exacts a severe metabolic price.
So what is actually happening up there? Well, a landmark 2022 study by Mathias Pessiglione found something wild. Cognitive fatigue isn't just a metaphor for running out of fuel. It's actually a buildup of smog. Specifically, it's the accumulation of glutamate. Now, glutamate is your brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter, but when its release starts outpacing your cell's ability to clear it away during prolonged mental activity, it builds up in the lateral prefrontal cortex. And at high levels, it acts as a literal neurotoxin. It causes massive neuronal hyperexcitability and metabolic stress. Your brain basically triggers a state of fatigue to force you to stop, simply to protect its own functional integrity.
This creates a really vicious metabolic cascade. And honestly, this is exactly what causes that heavy, awful brain fog you feel right around 3 p.m. As glutamate accumulates and stresses out your neurons, your dopamine tone plummets, which completely strips away your motivation to engage in complex thought. Meanwhile, your anterior cingulate cortex, which is basically your brain's conflict monitor and error detection system, it blunts its signals. Your biology is literally shutting down your rational mind to protect itself from your relentless, unstructured consumption. Every time you do this, you are biologically eroding your own capacity for high performance.
Section 2, Protocol 1, the reset. Okay, so how do we stop the bleeding? Your first mandate is cognitive conservation. You have to ruthlessly eliminate micro-choices from your existence. Remember how former President Barack Obama famously explained he only wore gray or blue suits? Elite performers and billionaires like Obama and Steve Jobs didn't wear a daily uniform for fashion. They did it specifically to actively circumvent decision fatigue. Your prefrontal cortex runs on roughly 20 watts of power, and they simply refuse to waste a single precious watt on trivialities.
To implement this yourself, you need to establish a strict, uncompromising, decision-free zone for the first 4 hours of your day. Automate your morning routine, pre-plan your meals, and enforce digital work blocks. And here's a key tip. Do not rely on willpower to resist distractions. Willpower is just way too metabolically expensive. Instead, use technology to enforce work blocks that automatically silence your digital environment. You have to protect your cognitive budget with ruthless aggression, reserving your brain's highest octane fuel strictly for high-stakes execution.
Beyond just fixing your schedule, you have to stabilize your energy at a chemical level. This is where Dr. Andrew Huberman's 90-minute caffeine delay protocol comes in, and it is absolutely critical for preventing that severe afternoon crash that just destroys your decision quality.
Here's how it works. When you wake up, your body naturally spikes cortisol to make you alert, usually peaking around 30 to 45 minutes in. At the same time, this chemical called adenosine, which builds up the longer you're awake and makes you sleepy, needs to be cleared out. If you chug caffeine right when you wake up, you're just blocking the adenosine receptors. The adenosine is still sitting right there, waiting in the background. But if you delay your caffeine intake for about 90 to 120 minutes, you allow your natural morning cortisol spike to clear out that residual adenosine on its own. The result? You significantly extend your natural alertness window and you bypass that miserable afternoon crash entirely.
Section 3. The Stoic Contrast.
Let's take a step back and think about our ancestors. Ancient men conquered empires through intense self-denial. Meanwhile, today, a lot of us are paralyzed trying to choose between 50 varieties of breakfast cereal. Our ancestral environment was characterized by sparse, survival-oriented choices. But modern man? We've built a landscape of hyper-choice that evolution absolutely never prepared us for, and it's leading straight to chronic anxiety and profound choice paralysis. Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius didn't have their dopamine hijacked by a scrolling algorithm. They taught that adversity wasn't just something to endure, but a deliberate training ground for the mind. They framed friction as fuel to cultivate self-discipline and courage.
Now, for years, we were fed this idea that willpower was like a limited battery that easily drained. It was called ego depletion. You might even still believe it, and you probably blame your lack of success on this lack of energy. But a massive replication crisis in psychology back in 2016 basically debunked that whole mechanism. Research now shows something incredible. If you simply believe willpower is a limited resource, you will succumb to ego depletion and you will quit. But those who hold a non-limited theory of willpower, viewing self-control as self-renewing, basically embracing that ancient Stoic view, they don't experience this performance drop at all. Your fatigue in many ways is largely a self-fulfilling prophecy birthed by a weak mindset.
Section 4, Protocol 2, the friction. So this brings up a huge question. Why does willpower actually fail when things get difficult? It's so easy to just blame a lack of motivation, but neuroscientists have actually mapped the physical location of tenacity in the brain, and honestly, it holds the blueprint for the ultimate execution strategy for building resilience.
It's called the anterior midcingulate cortex, or aMCC. Deep within your brain, this is the precise neurobiological hub of willpower. Think of it as the neural bridge between courage and wisdom. And the absolute most fascinating part? The aMCC physically grows when you force yourself to engage in difficult, friction-heavy tasks that you actively do not want to do. It literally strengthens when you override your brain's baseline desire to quit.
To optimize this circuitry, you have to execute daily micro-socks. What does that mean? Take a freezing cold shower, push through some intense cardiovascular output, consciously deny yourself an immediate craving. And look, this isn't just mindless masochism. This is highly targeted neuroplasticity. Every single time you override the brain's baseline desire to quit, you strengthen the pathways between the aAMC and your motor centers. You increase your baseline capacity to sustain effort. Stop avoiding pain. You need to harness it. Discomfort is literally the required neurochemical currency for building a brain that absolutely does not fold under intense pressure.
Section 5, the dark reality. Just look around you today. The average person is basically a passive consumer of their own life, sleepwalking toward mediocrity while their brain just rots. The modern landscape is a graveyard of hijacked attention. If you ignore these biological limits we've talked about, you are trading your true potential for the immediate gratification of a screen. You're going to end up exhausted, not by actual hard work, but by navigating an endless sea of irrelevant choices.
But the blueprint to reclaim your cognitive agency is now right here in your hands. You know the science of glutamate toxicity, you know about decision-free zones, and you know how to build your aMCC. So here's the real question. Will you exploit your biology to forge an apex mind, or will you remain a victim of the neural trap? Do you actually have the discipline to execute? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Now get out there and start optimizing your choices today.